Thursday marks 3 years since Superstorm Sandy made landfall. The disaster left millions in the dark in places like New York and New Jersey shore. Heat and light did not return in some cases for nearly 2 weeks. But what if terrorists go after our power grids? Emmy and Peabody Award winner Ted Koppel investigated. His new book is called Lights Out. We're pleased to welcome him to Studio 57. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Charlie. How are you?
Let's start with the book.
Yes.
Are we now talking about something, it's not a question of whether, but when?
That's exactly the way that the four-star general who commands CENTCOM put it. He said it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. The Chinese and the Russians already have essentially cyber time bombs inside our power grid. They probably won't use them because we and the Chinese and we and the Russians have so many interconnecting relationships. But if you start thinking about the Iranians and the North Koreans and groups like ISIS, they are all developing the same kind of capability, and they wouldn't be restrained the same way that the Chinese and the Russians.
You know what's so frustrating about the book? Because as you point out, it's not a question of if, but when,
Right.
that we're not prepared. Reading your book, it was very frightening to me how little prepared we are.
What scares me, Gail, is the fact that people in government, I mean, Leon Panetta, when he was Secretary of Defense, spoke about a cyber Pearl Harbor. The president, twice in State of the Union addresses, has warned about this kind of thing happening. When you ask, however, what the government's preparations are for the public in the event that something like this were to transpire, and we would be potentially tens of millions of people without electricity for months at a time.
So are you saying they don't view it urgently?
What I'm saying is there's no plan. There are plans for hurricanes, there are plans for snowstorms, there are plans for earthquakes. There is no plan for a cyber attack that would be infinitely longer in duration and more widespread than any of those natural disasters.
You went and interviewed, you sat down with the head of Homeland Security,
I did.
Secretary Johnson. What did he say when you asked him about the plan? The lack of one.
He pointed up at a bunch of white binders in his office and he said, "I'm sure there's a plan up there somewhere." And I said, "Well, don't you think it would be smart to get that plan out to the public before there is a massive break in electrical power?" And he said, "Look, I mean, this is a relatively simple thing. You need a radio, you need a battery-powered radio." My question is, when the power goes out, what are we going to tell people on those battery-powered
You even
radios?
used the word that he
Ted,
got a little prickly.
He did get a little prickly,
Yeah.
yeah. You're talking about a community of, what, 8 million people? The food in a place like Manhattan would run out in a couple of days. New York State has several million MREs, meals ready to eat. But when you take several million and you divide it by 8 million, you're talking about maybe a 2 or 3 day food supply. What happens on day 4?
Yeah. Well, let me just ask you this, because you said for the first time the government needs to worry about the internet being a weapon of mass destruction.
Absolutely.
But you also say, how do you prepare for something when you don't know where and when it could come from? Because it could come from anywhere.
What I'm suggesting is we need to prepare for the consequences of a cyber attack. It's not enough just to say, yes, we know it's going to happen. We don't know where, we don't know when, we don't know exactly how many people are going to be affected. We are not ready. My sense of it, though, is we're better off preparing. I mean, let's say we prepare for something that doesn't happen. Then we will at least be prepared for any other disaster that comes along. But I must tell you, after spending almost 2 years on this, I'm convinced that at some point or another, it's going to happen.